Hi, and welcome to Chief for Yourself. I'm glad you're with us today, wherever you happen to be in the world at this moment. Death is a part of life. We hear those words or something like them throughout our lives, but we don't usually give much thought to the words of the dying. Making the transition can sort of leave a dying person with one foot in this world and the other in the next. And sometimes they start having experiences from the other side, and their language may not make sense to us. But listening to the dying can often tell us things we need to hear, and in the process, we can also help them to move on. Our guest today began transcribing conversations with her terminally ill father, and she found his personality had undergone changes that couldn't easily be explained. Lisa Smartt collected hundreds of final words in all, analyzed them for patterns and themes, and many of those are included in her book, Words at the Threshold, What We Say as We're Nearing Death. And for starters, Lisa, you were a linguistics student at UC Berkeley. Before we get into the book itself, tell us just what it is to be a linguist.
Well, there are many kinds of linguists and many specialties. I'm not one of those people who speak 5 or 6 different languages. I was more interested in language acquisition, how it is that we process language, acquire language, and how language shapes our perception of the world and how our perception of the world shapes the way that we speak. So that was my primary interest, and my career was working with people who had with learning disabilities and differences, helping them to read and write until I began this research specifically in final words.
Mm-hmm. Now, talk about the story, and it's a wonderful story about your father and how you got involved in decoding the language of the dying.
My father was a PhD psychologist, very bright, very rationalist, didn't believe in anything beyond this world, materialist, but he did love language, and he was very, very bright and verbal. And about 3 weeks before he died, very suddenly he became ill, and we noticed changes in his perceptions and in the ways he talked about them. And the first thing was one night he got up and walked out the front door in his underwear at midnight. That was not a characteristic thing for him to do. And he walked out the front door and started talking about the big art exhibition he wanted to see and the boxes he was carrying to go there. Well, neither thing was true. The police stopped him and helped this 77-year-old man into the car, into the hospital. Well, that marked a turning point when my father really entered the active dying phase. And from that point on, he started talking about things that at first glance seemed nonsensical and, of course, frightened me at first. But as I dug deeper into the language and transcribed it and entered into the world in which my father had also entered, I came to really be intrigued by final words. And among the things my father talked about was seeing angels in the room, seeing unusual landscapes, things I had never, ever heard from him before.
Mm-hmm. So he wasn't necessarily a spiritual person, a religious person?
Not at all. Matter of fact, if someone said, Morton, you're Jewish, what kind of a Jew, what's your religious belief? He used to say, I'm a gastronomical Jew. I love corned beef sandwiches and coleslaw and cream soda. He used to joke and say that his idea of God was something delicious on rye bread. So he had no beliefs at all. And the few times that I would make any kind of references to something spiritual, he would usually roll his eyes. So when he started talking about the angels in the room and at his bedside, and he even reported that they announced to him, he said, the angels say 3 days left. Indeed, 3 days later, he passed on. So that was a remarkable thing for me to witness in a man who my whole life had been so skeptical.
What kinds of responses did you get when you first asked people to take note of these things that their loved ones were saying? That is an unusual request.
That's a really good question. In the beginning, I I got a lot of resistance to it, and I had to learn how to enter into this investigation that honored the sacred and private qualities as people are dying. So many people in the beginning looked at me like I was crazy. Like, why would you want to do that? But slowly and surely, and as I spoke to people who worked in hospices and had interviews, little by little, people began to think, wow, this is fascinating. And the more people who began to transcribe their loved ones' words and shared them with me, then the word came out, and suddenly I started hearing from people, yes, my father also spoke of angels, or I heard this strange language that I never understood before. And so I felt very honored to be in this position to gather this data because right after my father died, excuse me, I went to the library at UC Berkeley to see what kind of research had been done before, and I was really surprised to see that no one else had ever taken on a systematic study of the language of end of life. There have been other hospice nurses who've written some wonderful things about end of life and the kinds of communications, but no linguist had really looked at it. So it's been an honor to hear the stories and the accounts, but it took time to get the ball rolling.
Mhm. And the responses seem to us like gibberish, and I'm sure a lot of them seem
Yes.
that way to you. But any that you heard that really stood out to you?
Well, there was actually, to be honest, there were so many things in different types of categories. I'll start with my father, who said to me, "My modality is broken,"
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was very interesting. Or someone saying, "I'm going up so I can go down," or "Yes, I would like some scrambled eggs, but where would you reappear?" So at first I heard all these kinds of things that seemed just like word salad and nonsense. But as I began to collect the data and put them into categories, they actually started to fall into patterns and not seem as nonsensical as they did on first glance.
The brain seems to kind of stop worrying about language, if that's a correct term. Well, does it
Mm.
go spiritual, do you think, or mystical? What happens there?
Well, we see many things at end of life in the language. And the first thing is that people begin to speak in the kinds of metaphors in which we dream. Some people talk about the dying process as being entering into dream time. But people begin to speak of metaphors, and one of the kinds of metaphors we hear at end of life is about the journey. We will hear things such as, I lost my passport. I really want to go there, but I'm stuck. I need help to find my passport. Or you might hear someone say, yellow bus, the angels are in the yellow bus. So you'll start hearing people talk, and there are no yellow buses in the room with them as that we can see, but people will start talking in metaphors about boats that are coming or trains that are coming. And so one of the things that on first glance you think, oh, come on, Mom, you're talking nonsense. There's no yellow bus here. But when you start realizing that this kind of metaphor is common in bedsides around the country and in Canada, and I'm finding out now we're hearing these kinds of metaphors in other countries as well, you begin to think, this metaphor of the journey of end of life, why is it appearing? Could it be completely random? And for me, as someone who began to do this research, it struck me that maybe there is some kind of journey that we're all undertaking at the end of life.
Mm-hmm. I have to insert my own experience here because I did have quite an experience while reading the book. When I began reading Words at the Threshold, my mother was under hospice care. And
Oh, wow.
the timing was amazing. She was in a lot of pain from a broken leg that was not being treated because of her age,
Oh,
92. They couldn't really do much, but her caregivers were pretty upbeat about her condition. Yet when I stood near her bed, she kind of struggled to sit up. She's managed to sit up and open her eyes and smile and say, "Mr. Dram is coming tonight." And I said,
oh.
"Tonight?" And she said, yes, he's coming tonight. She had a very sure look on her face. And then she laid back down and resumed the very painful kind of posture that she was in. Now, I don't know if this Mr. Dram was a name she was struggling with or if he actually existed, but I said out loud to no one in particular, Lisa's book. And it just, it just I thought, wow, that's, and sure enough, she passed about 36 hours later at the age of 92. And so that's my own testimony to what we're talking about here. I appreciate the clarity that I suddenly got. So I'm wondering, do you hear afterwards from people with a follow up on their own experiences?
Yes, I do. I do, and I'm getting more of those now. Now that I'm speaking more on podcasts and radios. But I wanted to go back to that story that you just shared because we know I spoke to the hospice nurses about 2 weeks ago, and one of the women in attendance said to me that for her team, where she works, the best predictor of death approaching is seeing visitors, Mr. Dram or, whoever, or seeing ex-husbands or husbands or fathers or mothers who had passed before us. And people start speaking in very clear terms with these people that we do not see, the unseen. And hospice professionals, many have told me that this is one of the clearest indications to them that death is approaching. And there was a study from the Center for Hospice and Palliative Care, 500 people, and they found a very large percentage. We're looking at over 70% of people in either dreams or in their visions saw people who had died before them at their bedsides in the days or hours before death. So this seems to be something, if we, in isolation, we may hear about it at bedside with the ones we love. But when we start collecting data, we begin to see that this is actually a very widespread phenomenon.
Mm.
And yes, I'm so sorry. I think I lost the second part of your question. I beg your pardon. You had asked me.
Oh, I'm just wondering about the kind of follow up that you get from people.
Follow up. Thank you. So what happens is many people did write down transcripts, and I did get a follow up, and the kind of follow up that I did not expect. One type I had hoped for and expected is people shared with me that when they wrote down their loved one's final words, later on they would reflect upon them and see things they may not have noticed before, maybe realize that their loved one kept referring to wanting to go home, and they didn't quite get it, and then understood after the person died that they were actually speaking maybe about a spiritual home or something like that, when they thought, they'd say, Mom, I can't take you home now, you're in the hospital, and then finally, because they wrote down their final words, they could look back and go, oh, she was talking about another kind of home. But the other kind of follow-up that I did not expect, people who participated would contact me afterwards and share after-death communication. And this was something I did not expect to find, the wide range of experiences from the wide range of people. And anything from getting a text, some kind of nonsensical text message, but seemed to have indications it came from a loved one, or electricity, lights going on and off, or seeing a bird sit at a window for an uncharacteristically long time. Or sometimes people actually got automatic writing, or really hearing the voice of their loved one. And I had not thought that this kind of after-death communication would be so common amongst people who were not in the past, they would not identify as being spiritual so that was one of the things that really surprised me.
Mm-hmm. What were your own feelings about death right around the time you started this work?
Well, my father was someone who was very, very, very afraid of dying. If you don't have a spiritual belief, then death is a really scary thing because it's an end, and it makes no sense. We're born and we die. And I grew up with that. I grew up with that kind of perspective. I always had more of an open mind than my father. I always had hope there might be something more. However, since I've done this research, it has completely changed my mind, and I do not have the kind of fear of dying at all that I once had. And I also had the tremendous honor of working with Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience. He sort of guided me through this research. And, he is a person who has collected hundreds, if not thousands, of accounts of people of near-death experiences. And those are so compelling. And Raymond has shared with me his assurance that something exists beyond the threshold.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about religion earlier, and organized religion especially. I'm wondering, there don't seem to be as many accounts from people who see the white-robed, bearded man sitting on a rock in the sky. That kind of, yeah, that kind of story that we learned as kids, that seems to have gone by the boards, and people are somewhere else at the time of death. Is this changing a lot of people's thoughts about religion, do you think?
I think it is. Many people who have had near-death experiences, and I also saw this in the data from the Final Words Project, they might speak of a bright light, and some people do have an experience of Jesus or, as what they call a takeaway figure, or at the end of, afterlife experiences. But so many people report that what they experience in the afterlife, those who have died and then come back to report, talk more about the importance of love, and that love is non-denominational. And we also know that there really seems to be a cultural lens to it. So depending on what your religious beliefs are, you're more likely to see those figures in an afterlife, right? It really shapes how we see the world. But so many people have near-death experiences and come back, and I saw this in the Final Words, really talk more about love or a light or a comforting presence. And people do use the word God, but there's not that sense that there's this God with a scepter and a big beard who is getting ready to, punish us for our sins or anything like that. It really seems that unconditional love and learning lessons in this life, those are the things that are most important.
Mm-hmm. And there are some not so happy experiences as well. I guess some people
Yes.
show their fear or express some hesitancy for going forward into the next life.
Most definitely. I mean, I say in the book that this is definitely a skewed research. It was informal research. So many of the people who offered their stories, those were very positive accounts because it's harder to share the more painful ones. But there were definitely also accounts shared with me of people who turned to their loved ones and say, "Help me," or someone said, "I'm daring to die." And really, it is scary, especially in our culture. For people, there is a sense of fear many times. However, it also seems that we are almost wired or programmed to find some kind of peace and resolution before we pass. There's been a fair amount of research on the dreams of the dying that shows that people often in their dreams resolve many life issues, and the final words we hear from people are often those seeking reconciliation. And hospice nurses report to me that there may be this period of fear and anxiety, and then when people start seeing visitors or beautiful landscapes or find reconciliation with loved ones, or just have some kind of symbolic communication about what they're seeing, that it really seems to bring people a greater sense of ease, and many people leave with a sense of serenity in those final days, but not everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But not everyone.
Yeah. What do you hope to bring to the living with the work that you're doing to understand the language of the dying?
A few things. One is that I really hope that when people hear language that's puzzling or scary or confusing, that they may enter into that language with a sense of wonder and the possibility that it may be a reflection that something sacred is going on, and it maybe is not so scary. There are really indications to me that some of the language that we see show us or a pathway to seeing changes in consciousness, maybe even dimension. hope it gives people a sense of comfort, gives them tools to connect with their loved ones. You know, just like with our children, when they talk about imaginary friends or speak in nonsensical ways, we just often, the best parents do, enter into conversations with our kids about that big imaginary rabbit, right? Or the tomato that's talking or whatever. And it's a way to connect. And so if nothing else, to just, if someone starts talking about the boxing champion just walked into the room, or there are beautiful butterflies coming out of your mouth, or I need to get to the next country, find ways to enter in, like, can I help you get to the next country? I can help you get your passport. Or tell me more about the boxing champion. And I hope that what Words of the Threshold can do for others is give some tools and an overview so that people can be both good tourists and good guides with their loved ones through this whole territory of end of life.
One final question. What is in the future for you? Is there more of this kind of work or possibly branching out somehow? Any plans in that direction?
You know, I'm considering a few things. I've received so much more data, and I would love more through doing these interviews. And there's still more to do. I feel like Words of the Threshold is just the beginning to really understand the puzzling language at end of life. And I'm also very intrigued by Alzheimer's and dementia, because I've heard from other researchers that there may be some kind of parallel or intersection between what we hear from those with dementia and what we hear from the end of life. There are differences, but there are similarities, and I would love to do some more research that might offer people some tools to connect more lovingly and and helpfully for everyone with dementia. And finally, I want to do cross-linguistic. I want to hear what final words people are saying all around the world. And are we going to find universals? Is everyone speaking in different languages about a journey they're taking at end of life? So those are some of the things I'm very curious about.
Mm-hmm. And your website is finalwordsproject.org, and we can find out more about your work there. And yes, okay, and the book is Words at the Threshold: What We Say as We're Nearing Death, from our guest Lisa Smartt. Lisa, thanks for being on with us today and for giving us a comforting and informative look into a situation that can be difficult and confusing. Come back and talk with us again in the future, okay?
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Lisa. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, Lisa Smartt, and of course you'll see a link to our guest's website on the chiefforyourself.com start page. The show will be archived and available in podcast form on the Blog Talk Radio, usually the following day, following these recorded interviews. Podomatic.com is another place where you'll find it. Blueberry, there are a bunch of them, so you'll run into it somewhere if you don't already have your favorite spot. To find out about future shows and start times and other details, your best bet is to subscribe to Genuines. Look for the subscribe window at the top of the chiefforyourself.com start page or the home page. Get the blog posts, and that will give you the info. So that is going to do it for today. I thank you very much for being with us and for all the Chief for Yourself episodes that you've attended in years gone by. We have 10 years now under our belts. I'm very proud of that. And I appreciate the Facebook, Twitter, and other follows as well. So be well, and I'll talk to you soon.